Welcome to HOBI Conversations. I'm Steven Saunders. This podcast features the people leading our company and reshaping the ITAD industry in their own words. Real conversations about where the ITAD industry is headed, what it takes to lead in this space, and why doing this right matters more than ever. We're not here to narrate the industry, we're here to move it. If you're deep in this world, finding your footing, or just trying to understand where it's all headed, these conversations are for you. Let's get into it. How's it going, everybody? This is episode 2 of HOBI Conversations. Here with me today is Craig Boswell, the president here at HOBI, not only the leader of our company, but a thought leader across the whole industry, just pushing the industry forward. So I'm super excited for it, super excited for our conversations, and I'll let Craig introduce himself because I know he will do it justice. So.
I don't know. That was a great introduction. I feel a lot of pressure because episode 1 was my sister, co-owner, and CEO of our company, and she is outstanding at things like this. So hopefully everybody finds this valuable. I think we're talking about a very, very important subject today. So I look forward to the conversation.
Perfect. We're excited. We'll jump right into it. So recently you've had the opportunity to identify just kind of the top 5 issues that are commanding attention here in the ITAD industry. Some of those being trade restrictions and embedded batteries and AI hardware, international service management. Before we drill into any of those, just give your point of view from your seat. What are you seeing as the biggest challenge in the industry from the company side and from the asset manager side who are hiring, bringing on ITADs? And where do you see that going over the next 12 to 24 months?
So narrowing it down to one, this business can be hard and it's challenging. I have great empathy for the IT asset managers at the companies we work with. So I'm not going to narrow it down to one right away. I would say 2 of the biggest emerging issues over the last couple of years, one on a very big picture basis, would be the desire for companies to get better control of the international management of devices. Most companies like ours, HOBI, deal with very, very large enterprises that have operations in facilities all over the world. And I think traditionally, even these large enterprises have kind of had an ad hoc approach to managing those devices. And now they're realizing that there's a lot of risk in that ad hoc approach. So in my opinion, they are wisely seeking the experts in the space to help them handle the global management of devices. And experts in the space is often their primary ITAD provider. So I would say one of the big emerging changes in the last few years is we are having to handle devices all over the planet, and we're providing consulting on the best way to do that. We're explaining the situations that arise specific to certain countries and even cultural differences. And then we're explaining how the other day-to-day ITAD challenges can impact the efficacy of providing those services worldwide. And that kind of dovetails to the second big challenge that we've seen emerge over the last couple years. And to me, it is the biggest challenge facing the industry, is the advent of, pretty much any large enterprise is now using some kind of device management software, and a feature in those device management softwares is anti-theft remote management. And it's a great thing. I think it's good to give peace of mind that if your employees are traveling and they leave their laptop in the security bin and run to their plane, that somebody can't pick up that laptop and look at all your data.
Yes.
But the problem is from a device management process at end of life, it has really changed the process, and it has done that worldwide. We deal with vendors and partner vendors all over the world, and I can tell you we are having conversations with those vendors that work with us about the best practices we have developed to deal with this issue. But even those best practices are perturbating the historical process significantly. It has made it much, much more difficult to provide low-cost, efficient ITAD services, IT asset disposition, with this remote management problem.
I see. Well, since that seems to be kind of a super important, let's just park it there for a little bit. For listeners who may not know kind of the industry verbiage or even just like having lived the pain, walk us through some of the laptop and mobile just problems with devices arrive on our dock and they're enrolled in Intune, Workspace ONE, Apple Business Manager, just insert interface here. What does that look like just operationally for us? And what does that cost clients when it happens just at scale? We talk about thousands and thousands of assets. What could be the implications there?
Yeah, I can tell you it's bad enough that as you mention him, it kind of depresses me because it's hard to deal with. And it is because it just makes the process so difficult. So, these softwares are designed to keep a individual that is not part of your entity to not be able to access that device. Well, as your asset, disposition provider, I'm not part of your entity. So, the traditional process would be you get the devices in, typically in bulk, you run them through an initial inventory process that captures serial number, allows reporting to the client so that they can move those devices out of source one or whatever, management product that they're using. And then you would go to a functional test and a data erasure. The issue there is when you go to power up these devices, if they're remote managed, you can't get beyond the BIOS in a lot of cases. Or if it's Apple Business Manager, a little message is going to come up and say, this particular device is the property of this entity, which we consider proprietary information. So, the traditional process of get it in, do your initial inventory, test it, erase it, and get it to final disposition, whether that be redeployment or retesting and sale or whatever that might be, is now stopped, frozen in place, as we got to take these assets, we got to take them out of flow and set them aside and report those assets to the client and say, hey, these are still being managed by your entity. We need, that corrected or else we can't process them. It's not that simple either. We report those devices, and the people we're reporting them to are typically disposition managers. Well, the disposition manager is not necessarily the one that controls the device management. That's typically somebody in the IT department. So then they got to move that one step further away from us and get that person involved and say, hey, these devices need to be unenrolled. And then we have to wait for that person to get it to their priority to unenroll them. Then they have to feed all that information back to us. Then we have to recheck. And I can tell you in a significant number of cases, we'll find, well, all of them except these 5 were unenrolled. And so you can imagine, we envision this process like Henry Ford on the conveyor line where we put it in the front end and it comes out the back end. And this particular problem is causing that assembly line that is supposed to run from the front to the back of the facility to take all these turns and stops. And so there's tremendous inefficiency in that, dries up a lot of costs, can drive frustration. We want to make this process as smooth and easy for our clients as we possibly can. But, with the present tools available to us, we can't overcome this. And so, unfortunately, it raises the cost of the process. It causes frustration in both parties sometimes trying to get to the point where we can get these moving. And if we fail, it can significantly impact the economic recovery associated with the devices.
I would love to sit there as well. Just hearing you talk about it, it sounds like the biggest thing lost here is time.
And in our industry specifically, time literally is dollar signs. It literally is money with just the fluidity of markets and stuff. So my question for you is, how big would you say the residual value gap is between a properly unenrolled device and a locked one on today's secondary market? And just from what you've seen today in your experience,
Trying to save it. Yeah.
that's all good. And then the second part of that question is just in your experience, what percentage of devices are still arriving locked in that way? Is that trending up or down? Are we seeing progress there? What does that look like?
So from a value standpoint, the value difference between an enrolled device that we can't get unenrolled, at that point we have to destroy that device. We have to destroy the data associated with that device. It's not a saleable device. So, in the worst case scenario, you are comparing the value of a fully functional resaleable device, which can range from hundreds of dollars to over $1,000, to the scrap value of a device, which is dollars. Literally maybe tens of dollars if it's a larger laptop. So a huge difference. Even beyond that, just the putting the devices aside and the waiting process, even if we're successfully unlocking them, if that process drags on, and I'm horrified to admit that I've had that process drag on for not just weeks but months. We always joke in this industry that IT assets sitting on your shelf are not fine wine; they're more like bananas, right? They're rotten.
Absolutely.
So, even if you eventually resolve it, if that problem, if that process, it takes quite a bit of time, the value that you're ultimately able to get for that asset would have decreased. So, residual value race to scrap is massive, but even residual value today versus residual value a month from now or 2 months from now or 3 months from now is higher, and we're losing value as we wait for this process to run through its course.
It's so interesting when I have these conversations in my seat. What I try to convey is the time piece could be the difference between you knocking either a huge dent out of your entire refresh cost, or even kind of canceling it out entirely, or like having to just foot the bill for all of that. So like the urgency component is super important. Just to shift here to a little bit more of kind of the housekeeping side, what would you say formal, auditable unenrollment process looks like, and especially at scale when it comes to like thousands of assets? Who should own that inside the client organization? Where does it sit in the retirement workflow? What specifically should asset managers be demanding from their internal IT teams?
So the state of play is most of our clients fall into two categories. One category is the intent is to unenroll the devices prior to them reaching our facility. That is the ideal case for us, and that really helps with the overall process. Unfortunately, I don't think the importance of that step is always communicated thoroughly and thoughtfully to the IT department. I think it can be an afterthought for them, and they're not realizing the impact on the process they're having. And frankly, makes their job more difficult, because if they don't do it well, a week later, we're going to be coming back, or the disposition manager is going to be coming back to them and say, hey, you missed these 22 devices, and now you got to go back through the process all over again. So, the ideal scenario is that the entity that's going to be sending the asset can resolve this prior to sending the asset to the disposition provider. In some cases, and I understand this, those entities are concerned for one of two reasons about doing it prior to departure. One reason would be they don't want to unenroll an asset that really isn't gone. And the only way they're dispositioning thousands of assets is hard. We do it every day. It's our job. It's not necessarily our client's job, right? So being 100% accurate, I understand, is that difficult. So they don't want to accidentally say, okay, these 1,000 assets are going, unenroll them all, and then find out, oh, wait a second, it was only 998. Now we've unenrolled 2 assets that are still in the building.
Right.
And so, I can respect where that is a problem. I think, a lot of the ITAM tools now make that a lot less likely. Companies have much better control of assets than they previously had, but that still can be a problem. And then you have some entities that they just don't want to unenroll the asset until they're 100% sure it is about to be dispositioned. From a security perspective, they want to know that that's the very last thing that ever happens to that asset is that it gets unenrolled from our system, because the next step is it's going to get data erased and resold, or it's going to get data erased and redeployed, or it's going to get scrapped, or whatever's going to happen to that asset. So if that's your policy, I understand that. What we would like to see is, once we have established that's your policy, is a high value being put on unenrolling those assets quickly when we submit it, and then kind of looking to the future, kind of what can we do, what would make you comfortable that somehow your ITAD provider is more involved in the process, and that that's kind of looking to the future of what we might be able to do.
For sure. Even today I had a conversation and I was just explaining, as an ITAD partner, we're just an extension of existing processes. Our job is not to come as necessarily just a normal vendor, but to just accentuate processes that are already happening and make the IT situation just easier overall. I guess just last thing on device locks, I'm fascinated by this. Just if you had to wrap this up and present this to somebody, every gap in preparation pushes assets out of the top flow and kind of into a bottom one. From a vendor's perspective, if you're sitting in the opposite seat, what should clients understand about what really happens in the flow in terms of just costs and time delays and data security exposure? And realistically, when a locked device hits our warehouse, what percentage of them can be remediated downstream versus written off?
So we can't do anything right now to solve this problem internally to our organization, and it is very disruptive. The process is so random, you can't predict what devices are going to be locked, what devices are not going to be locked. So you can imagine, most vendors, and HOBI is among this, most sophisticated vendors have invested a lot in floor control software. Our ERP is very sophisticated in handling assets that are running through our facility, that we have tight controls on what they can do, where they can go. We can customize processes for clients that might want redeployment or repair and return versus those that want disposition, those that want destruction on certain devices if they're an OEM, or all these customizable services. Well, in this case, you're taking a device that has a path through your system. You're interrupting that path. Now that device has to go into some type of storage internal to your facility. That storage area has to be designed flexible enough that one day it's got 500 assets in it. The next day, unfortunately, it's got 20,000 assets in it. And you still got to deal with that. You got to be able to find them. You got to be able to go retrieve them and check them when the client says they might be unlocked. And you had asked previously, how has this changed? It was a fraction of the devices 3 years ago, 5%, 8%. We're seeing upwards of 30% of the devices that hit our facility now in the mobility category, whether it be laptops, tablets, or phones, that are still enrolled in some kind of device management software. So it is growing rapidly, meaning that our ability to deal with this is, being pressured because we have to store more and more devices. Those storage times can't be predicted. Mm-hmm. Again, we're now relying on, when can the client get them unlocked? When does the IT person get around to that? Again, one of our worst things is the disposition manager at the client will get the word, okay, I think they're unenrolled. Okay, we're going to pull them out. We're going to start. Oh, they're not unenrolled yet. Now they got to go rerun back. And I have to admit that process with a certain client has happened multiple times where they're unenrolled. We check them. No, they're still enrolled. Oh, check them again. No, they're still enrolled. And they're going back and forth. And, that's so inefficient. So, I think one of the things the industry as a whole, as I talk to other industry members and as a broader, situation with both our clients and the actual disposition providers look at this problem, this situation has to change. And I think if you look at, what ServiceNow did with the API to help us do certain parts of the ITAM process, I think the future in this is going to be some type of process where the ITAD provider can get more involved in the unenrollment. And, the framework for that and how that will be is probably a larger discussion than this podcast. We got 3 hours. I'm not sure anybody's going to watch a 3-hour podcast. I will be talking more about that. I'm going to give a talk on this at the ITAM conference, be talking more about what that kind of framework might look like. But, I think this problem has to be corrected because the costs are higher and we want low-cost processes, but the risk is higher too. If you take a product like Intune is not readily detectable when a device is first powered up because it's buried in the Windows OS as opposed to in the BIOS. And it's an extra step to go to determine if a device is Intune. And then rechecking it is another extra step. And, those processes that get more and more complicated are more and more subject to failure. And we don't want this process to fail. The last thing we want is for a device to not be detected as being managed and not be corrected, and devices that, could be sold, not to be sold because we're not properly communicating that. And, it's been a big focus of our ERP development to handle this well inside of HOBI. But, every ITAD provider is dealing with this, and the sophistication needed to deal with it properly is a huge problem for the larger providers and almost an unaddressable problem for the smaller ITAD providers that might be dealing with mid-market companies that are still using products.
Yeah, that's just a huge part of the conversation. I'm excited to hear you speak at ITAM on that. I know we've leaned super heavily into the device locks throughout our time. So as we get towards the end, I just want to step back from that a little bit and just, if our Mount Rushmore of problems in the ITAD field are embedded batteries, AI, data center hardware, and then international service management, shifting to trade policy, you've talked about all of that. Of those, which do you think is going to catch the most IT asset managers off guard over the next 12 months? With all the tech movement, global affairs, the whole thing, what do you think will be the most unprecedented over the next year?
I'm going to say that I think, as I talked about international issues and trade issues, I don't know if that's as much as a problem as an opportunity. I think hardware changes is going to be surprisingly complex for disposition managers as we look at both the very small devices and the very big devices. So you look at the small devices like my watch that is now become a corporate device because it's tied to my phone. And those devices and other embedded battery devices, I don't think IT managers that are dispositioning these realize what a challenge they are for the industry. And that even extends to IoT devices and everything else that has these embedded lithium-ion batteries, present a fire risk if they're not dispositioned properly, and are just, finding their way all over the organization. And then on the very, very big side, in the data center space, as we look to make larger, more efficient data centers as we look at new cooling technologies, I think the mixture of hazardous materials in the cooling technologies with the electronics hardware is going to be something that, the ITAD industry itself is even having a hard time catching up to. And I think it will catch the IT asset managers completely off guard that this is a whole new process. This isn't just an electronics issue. This is a hazardous material disposition issue. And then I think that the next step beyond that, the IT asset disposition industry, the cutting edge of that industry, there's been a tremendous amount of investment in ERPs and better tools, and lately a tremendous amount of investment in AI and the ability for us to do this on a more sophisticated level. And that is a wonderful thing because it makes our processes more effective. It allows new tools for us to use. But I think one of the things that a lot of organizations are missing, except the most, thoughtful organizations, as our process gets more sophisticated, the ability for ITAD and ITAM to kind of marry and create this vision of a total global management of my assets from the minute, it's coming to my door, maybe before it ever hits my door, to the final disposition, whether it be looking at, data on when's the most cost-effective time to refresh my assets, or when does redeployment make sense for my organization, or, are there certain assets that, I should be doing repair on because the type of failures they're having, it would be much more effective to have them repaired and much more cost effective and time effective for my organization. And so, there's challenges out there, but I also think there's some huge opportunities coming for us to get much more sophisticated on how we marry these two processes. And, from not only a cost-effective standpoint for the organization, but from an overall circular economy, sustainability perspective, there's just some real opportunities there.
Right. Wow. I'm excited. You're firing me up, Craig. Come on. Thank you, everybody, for listening to episode 2. Craig will be presenting at the IATAM Summit in Las Vegas 2 weeks from now. If you want to learn more about anything we talked about in this podcast, it's a great opportunity to do so, or to just meet the leadership and the team here at HOBI and just chat a little bit. So we look forward to seeing everybody. And again, thank you for listening.